Hey podcasters, Matt Baird here. We have a great show for you today, our last episode of the year. We're going to take a look back at the 2017 highlights with ATA President Corinne McKay. But before we do, let's listen in on the highlight reel from ATA's 58th annual conference, which was held this year in Washington, D.C., October 25th through the 28th. The annual conference is by far the brightest star on the association's calendar, and it's one of the biggest conferences for translators and interpreters in the world. This year, over 1,700 people attended. If you've yet to see this highlight video, then check it out on ATA's YouTube channel after the podcast.
I would like to give a grand welcome to all of our newbies and a welcome back to our buddies. If the statement is true of you, you're going to point to them and say connection. I know it sounds silly.
I remember my first conference was quite scary.
Still to this day, they can be a little overwhelming. There's so much going on and so many people.
It's very rewarding. It gets a little intimidating because there's a lot of people to meet. They were all very receptive, and it made me feel welcome.
I think everybody left the room like in a different mood. Everybody was so happy, so ready. It's like, let's do this.
The welcome reception for me is always a really fun and overwhelming experience.
It's exciting seeing all my old friends who I haven't had a chance to see in a long time.
Everybody just keeps moving around and you see all the people you haven't seen in a year.
It's like the office party of the office you don't work at.
The whole time you got somebody coming up to you saying hi, and then you see somebody that you haven't seen.
I want to take 3 photos, hold them over to the flash. Hold for the flash, hold it.
Now I'm ready.
No, I'm going to stand in the front. I'll take the picture.
I did the photo booth. We have silly photos. I might send them to my kids and they'll say, really, Mom?
For the flash.
It is my deep honor and true pleasure, and my great relief, to introduce ATA's new president, Corinne McKay.
If I feel well prepared to serve as president, I think that is largely due to David, so thank you.
Because we're in DC, there's a lot of really good speakers in the area.
The sessions have really risen in as far as the nature, the scope, the breadth, and the depth of all the sessions.
There's a lot of focus in advocacy, government, and I think that's wonderful.
We had 50 ATA members make over 70 visits to senators and representatives to advocate for issues that are important to the language profession.
I was slightly intimidated that I was going to Capitol Hill and meeting with Senate and Congress staffers, but it was fantastic.
It really felt good. We really walked out of every meeting feeling pumped up.
This year we have 2 very early morning events starting at 6:15, 6:30 in the morning. If you like to be energized, you can go do Zumba. If you like to start your day in sort of a more calm, centering way, you can go do yoga.
I've been teaching yoga since 2006. It's for everybody. It's all levels. It really helps to get all the kinks of traveling and sitting and not moving out. If you can make it out of bed in the morning, it's a good way to start your day on a positive note and earn your breakfast too.
Any of us translators are active on Twitter. We don't necessarily know each other or know who's behind the Twitter handles.
Oberoni Trends.
Okay, yes, I have seen you on Twitter. You want to take a Twitter picture? Sure.
Bright and breezy. All year long, some of us connect with each other virtually.
Say hello to my friend Ben.
And it's wonderful to actually sit down beside them for breakfast.
The exhibit hall, it's bad for my pocketbook.
Deanna and I went into the money booth and we both won WordFast licenses and cash.
I really enjoyed looking at the diversity of booths that we have.
We are a union for interpreters. We organize both legal and medical interpreters.
That's for plantar sciatica, neuropathy, fibromyalgia, and capitana.
We're getting shock therapy.
You see that
Yeah, it's a simulated of the muscle.
The job fair, we had over 30 agencies register for that this year.
Pretty much within the first 10 minutes it was packed, even though it was probably one of the largest halls around.
Have your resume, just be ready to make contact and have little mini job interviews.
Since I have this, I will go ahead and contact you.
What language do you speak? Spanish and French. Great.
And you could kind of talk one-on-one, get a sense for where the match was, and connect with actual recruiters.
Good to meet you.
The brainstorm networking is fun, very quick back and forth. You know, you get this topic, you're at this table with 5 people that you've never met before, you exchange cards really quickly.
Everyone dealing out?
And then you get this problem and you have to solve it in like 3 minutes.
Bring your A game, because you have to be sharp, you have to be able to offer solutions.
You need to make sure that you take care of your relationship.
Would you make an exception for a client that you really want to work with?
Let me check if the person I talked to last week is still available.
Just voice your opinion like you would to any other colleague, even if it's your first time at the conference, even if you're starting.
And you might be surprised when people start nodding their head when you suggest something at the table.
I'm going to miss the energy. The conference is just full of energy.
Not everybody goes to every conference every year, but no matter what conference you go to, you'll walk away with a few new friends who you'll look forward to seeing the next time.
It's like a big family reunion almost. Now I got to wait another year to have my family reunion again.
That was Ted Wozniak there at the end, ATA's new president-elect. Now next year's ATA Family Reunion is in New Orleans, October 24th through the 27th. Ted's the organizer this year, and the Big Easy is his hometown. So I think we're in for something special. Now, the annual conference may be the flagship event, but the ATA Armada is huge. There are countless programs and activities underway as the association sails through the year. And that means we have a lot to talk about today. So let's get to it. Welcome to the ATA Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Baird, and you're listening to episode 17. Each month on the podcast, we bring you news and insights from the American Translators Association. Today is our last podcast for 2017. And for the next half an hour or so, we're going to take a look back at what's happened this year. What were the highs? What were the lows? Even if you've been following ATA pretty closely over the year, don't miss this chance to wrap up 2017 before the ship is steered into the new year. Joining me today is ATA President Corinne McKay. Corinne recently took over the presidency from David Rumsey after serving 2 years as president-elect. Welcome to the podcast, Madam President.
Thank you so much for having me and for all of your energy for the podcast, Matt.
Right on. Thank you. Now, David, during his presidency, he liked to speak about ATA in nautical terms. Anybody who read his column in the Chronicle or heard him talk at ATA conferences over the past couple of years, he compared ATA to a big ship. And I think it's a great analogy. It really works well, and I couldn't help stealing it in my intro. My question to you, our first question, was 2017 mostly smooth sailing for ATA?
Yeah, so first of all, I have to say that I'm kind of jealous of David's nautical analogies because I, like you used to, Matt, live in a landlocked state. Not only is Colorado not on the ocean, but we have basically no water in the whole state. So I'm not sure I can keep up with the nautical metaphors, but I'm happy to say that, yeah, 2017, I think, was a great year by any measure for ATA. So most importantly, if you've been following ATA's status for the past, 5+ years, our financial situation right now is both excellent and stable. So that's very, very good news. The rollout of the computerized certification exam was very smooth. Again, if you've been following ATA News for a number of years, you know that it took a long time, much longer than we had hoped, to search for a good solution to the computerized exam. And we did finally find that, and it's going well and actually is becoming the majority of exams are now taken on the computer rather than handwritten. The conference, our most recent conference in DC, went off without a hitch, I think. I can say that because even though my title was conference organizer, the staff do all of the logistics. I just generate the unrealistic ideas about what should happen at the conference. So when I say it went off without a hitch, I mean that as a compliment to our incredible staff who plan all of the conference logistics. And lots of people know, but some may not, that the ATA Chronicle, our magazine, won the prize for best periodical at the FIT International Federation of Translators Congress, which was held in Brisbane, Australia over the summer. And when we revamped the Chronicle several years ago, that was our sort of pie in the sky goal, was to win the FIT prize for best periodical, and we did. I think by any measure, our PR program is also going very well. I know you recently interviewed Madalena Sanchez-Zampaulo, who's our PR chair, and I'll talk a little later about the presentation that she gave at the conference. But that was really in response from members that we have strengthened the PR program over the past several years. And I believe we've had over 50 placements for the articles that our writers group has written. Additionally, thanks to the incredible work of IPAC, our Interpreter Policy Advisory Committee, we rolled out the credentialed interpreter designation. So if you look in the ATA directory now, although ATA does not certify interpreters, you'll see a little designation CI, like our CT credential, for people who are interpreters who are credentialed by another organization. So if you hold a recognized credential as a legal, medical, or conference interpreter, you can now get a designation in the ATA directory. And it really was IPAC who helped us come up with the system that allows us to do that. And I think it's a really great step towards parity for interpreters and translators within ATA. Also associated with the conference, we took advantage of being in Washington, D.C. to hold our first ever Advocacy Day at the conference. So through the lobbying organization that we belong to, JNCL, which is the Joint National Committee for Languages, we had 50 ATA members who made about 70 visits to senators and representatives' offices to talk to them about issues that are important to us. And I know that you were part of the Colorado delegation for that, Matt, if you want to say anything about it. But it was sold out. We only had room for one busload of people, and we got really universally positive feedback on that Advocacy Day. And I think lastly, we were able, thanks to our improved financial situation, we were able to add a new employee at headquarters. So Adrian Alekna is now our manager of professional development, and our previous person who held that position, Teresa Kelly, who many people know because she organized, she was our meeting planner and organized the conference for years and years and years. She now does web development and graphic design for us. So I think any way you look at it, I mean, I'm a naturally positive person, but I do think that however you look at it, things are on a very good trajectory.
Very nice. does sound like quite the voyage, though. But I'm glad to hear that it was mostly smooth sailing.
Yes,
Now, if
yes.
you had to name one 2017 highlight for the association, what would that be?
I think it's pretty impossible to pick just one thing. So I think I'm going to say the award for the Chronicle, and I think is particularly dear to me because my first major project when I joined the ATA board 5 years ago was to work on the Chronicle task force, which was a major step in turning around ATA's finances. So we sort of decided we really needed to make major cuts to the Chronicle budget, but we wanted to do that while maintaining or even improving the quality of the magazine. And I think the Chronicle budget was reduced by over 50%. And then for the first time ever, we won the FIT Prize for the best periodical. So I think we achieved both of those credentials or both of those goals. Then I'm going to mention the CI credential, the credentialed interpreter designation that I mentioned in the first question. I think that was a huge step towards at least having parity for translators and interpreters within ATA. So one sort of interesting factoid, which is a huge change since I joined the board, is that if the ATA Interpreters Division were its own association, it would be the largest interpreters association in the world, to our knowledge. So interpreters have started playing such a major role in ATA that I think the CI credential is really important. And then I'm also going to mention the computerized certification exam. I think that really brought us into the 21st century, and within the confines of, taking a seated exam, it goes a long way towards mirroring how we actually work rather than on paper and with paper dictionaries, unless someone chooses to take the exam that way.
All right, now that was three things. Not one, but I do understand the dilemma that I just put you in. Now, how about for you personally? Did 2017 have a personal highlight?
Well, I think here I can pick only one thing because I think as the president-elect, it's hard not to pick the conference, partially because so the president-elect organizes the conference twice. And so with San Francisco being my first conference and DC being my second as conference organizer, I felt so much less stressed about this conference. And I was really excited about some of the guest presenters we were able to book because of being in DC. So a number of the guest speakers were drawn from local international organizations or government branches. We were able to have Advocacy Day. And if any of you were there who saw our incredible closing keynote speaker, Mohammed Abdelkader, who talked about the importance of translators and interpreters' work in the world. I think the conference was a highlight of my year just in my life in general, and certainly in my work with ATA it was.
Now, did ATA have to weather any storms this year?
So I'm happy to report that I really cannot identify anything major. I think when you work on the inside and when, like many of us in this profession, you're a compulsive overachiever, there's always something to work on. Of course, I am always looking at ways that we can do better. So I would say, I think all of us know that a high priority is a new website for ATA. And we have a task force working on that right now. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm pleased to say that we really had no major incidents to report in 2017.
That's excellent. In July of this year, you and David recorded a halftime report for this podcast, episode 13. I was away on vacation, so I was very happy that you grabbed the bull by the horn, so to speak, and did that for me. What are some of the things, maybe you can remind some of the listeners or tell some of our listeners who haven't had a chance to listen to it, what are some of the things that you talked about in that podcast?
Yeah. So at that point in the year, we did a lot of looking ahead at the conference. So I think it's great to look back on that now and know that the conference is in the history books and by all accounts at or ahead of our projections for attendance and attendee satisfaction. We also talked about the major revamp of our PR program and the addition of our writers group. And if you were at the conference, you saw a presentation by our PR chair, Madalena Sanchez Zampaulo, which focused on the publications that have featured ATA and promoted our members and our professions. Or perhaps you listened to Matt's recent interview with her in the most recent ATA podcast. When I think another thing is when David and I talked over the summer, David and Yuta Deal Dominique and Yershi Stayskal, various ATA members, had just done a big interview with CNBC, but we weren't sure what was going to happen with that. And that turned into a really incredible CNBC segment on careers in translation and interpreting. And Madalena was able to show the clips of that in her presentation at the conference, which I think everyone really enjoyed. And when we did the halftime podcast, we were also looking ahead to Advocacy Day because we had never done that before. And it was a great success. As I mentioned, the bus sold out and we had a really positive response to our messages. I think one concern that people had going into Advocacy Day was with the current very tumultuous political climate in the US, whether our legislators, staffers would be receptive to messages about things like procuring language services based on best value rather than on price. And I think the feedback we got from the Advocacy Day attendees is that people were very receptive to that, to our messages. Perhaps they want something different to think about. But I think that was the feedback we got, is that they were extremely receptive to the messages that we were conveying about why the language professions are important and issues that are important to us.
Yeah, I can second that. As you mentioned before, I took part in Advocacy Day, and it was a really fascinating experience, a fun experience, and an invigorating experience because we really left the meetings. I got to go to meetings with fellow Coloradans, Karen Kachik and Yves Boudreau, and we made this a really excellent team, and it was fun to see the interest coming from the staffers because you just didn't know, are they just going to look at you sort of glassy-eyed and
right.
Sort of thank you for your time and then shuffle you out the door, and that wasn't the case. In one case, we literally sat with a staffer for over 30 minutes, and he was very engaged and very interested in the topic. With regard to the episode 13 from the summer, I would like to encourage our listeners, if you did not listen to that, it was very informative. You'll get a good idea of a lot of the things, a lot of the advocacy and outreach that David and Corinne and ATA is doing. So go back and listen to that. Now let's move on to the second half of the year, Corinne, and we've been talking about a few of these things. You've mentioned the annual conference as your personal highlight, and I would say for most members, especially the members that attend the conference, and for me personally, the highlight of my professional year is the ATA conference, and ATA's 58th annual conference that was in Washington, D.C. the late October. So you've talked about it briefly so far, but can you give us sort of a nice recap?
Sure. So we had about 1,740 attendees. We held the conference at the Washington Hilton, which is really in the heart of the action, right near a few blocks from DuPont Circle. Ahead of the conference, we received over 400 proposals for 175 sessions. So it was quite a difficult task to narrow that down into what became the actual program. And on Wednesday, the day before the conference started, we held 16 advanced skills and training sessions. And I believe that all but 3 of those sold out. And so those are sort of limited space 3-hour sessions with some of our top presenters, where you learn hands-on skills that you can apply right away. So we've gotten a really positive response to our revamp of that pre-conference day. We were very lucky with the weather. That's something as the conference organizer that I always worry about is it going to be pouring rain? Is there going to be a hurricane? But attendees were able to be outside and enjoy the DC area. And in that particular hotel, we had a lot of ballroom space for things like the job fair, the exhibit hall, and brainstorm networking. So if you attended, the first time we did the job fair was in San Francisco, and the concept worked well, but the room where we had it was extremely crowded and claustrophobic. And this year we were able to give more space to some of those events so that I think the logistics ran a lot better. And as we talked about, our closing keynote speaker was Mohammed Abdelkader, who's the director of the Stevens Initiative, which is a intercultural and international education program of the Aspen Institute. And I think he did a fantastic job talking about why our work as translators and interpreters matters in the modern world. And every session I attended during the conference was not just good, but outstanding. And I think that's simply a reflection of the fact that as more people propose sessions, we have more to choose from and we can have the very best in the program. So overall, I'm extremely pleased with how everything went at the conference.
Right on. Now, for those of us who like to plan ahead, would you like to give us a preview of some of the upcoming conference locations?
Sure. So far, we are booked through 2022. So next year in 2018, we'll be in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I'm sure that that's going to be a great time in a very fun city. So whether you're into music, food, nightlife, shopping, it's all there. We'll be on the edge of the French Quarter and walking distance to whatever you want to do. Then in 2019, we're trying something new, which is a small convention center in Palm Springs, California. So we will literally take over the city. Palm Springs itself is only 40-something thousand people. So I live in Boulder, Colorado, which feels like a pretty small city and is 100,000 people. And Palm Springs is like less than half the size of Boulder. But the neat thing is they have an incredibly gorgeous convention center, and we will literally take over the town and see what it's like to have the conference in a small convention center instead of in a big conference hotel. So I think for our members who might prefer something outside of a big city, and Palm Springs surprisingly is not difficult to get to. They have a full-size airport, or you can fly to LA and then drive from there. Then in 2020, we'll be in Boston, where we've had several very successful conferences. 2021 will be in Minneapolis, which the board visited and loved last year. It's a very walkable city with a fully pedestrian downtown and a really beautiful weather in the fall. And then in 2022, we will be in Los Angeles, California. Downtown LA has undergone a dramatic revitalization in the past few years, and I was really, really impressed when we visited it. There's a lot going on. The downtown feels very safe, lots of cool restaurants and stores, and the hotel where we're having the conference is like old Hollywood at its finest. It has this kind of retro fabulous fountains in the lobby. If any of you have seen the Austin Powers movies, it looks like a very classy version of an Austin Powers theme, and the weather should be great. So I think what you see from that lineup is that we're trying to sort of mix things up. We've gotten requests from members to try some smaller cities. Our conference has gotten big enough that we need to try some small convention centers because we're outgrowing a lot of the hotels that we would like to meet at. So I think you can see in that lineup through 2022 that we've got a lot of different things in the mix.
Yeah, that's a lot to look forward to. I'm personally looking forward to several of those locations. And excited to see the Palm Springs concept, for example. That'll be interesting to see because that I think could potentially open up then new destinations for the conference down the road.
Yeah. So for anybody who isn't familiar with the concept that we're talking about, the issue that we have is now with 1,800 people coming to the conference, there are lots of cities where we would like to go, but we can't go there and meet in a hotel because there aren't any hotels large enough. So for example, we would really love to meet in the Pacific Northwest. So we have tons of members in Seattle, Portland area, but there are no hotels large enough for us to meet anymore. So then the choice that we face is, do we limit the conference to, let's say, 1,500 people and it sells out, so there are people who get shut out and can't come, or do we look at convention centers? And of course, we don't want to meet in a, huge cavernous convention center. But when we visited Palm Springs, we were really intrigued because they have this really beautiful small convention center. And then people can choose whatever hotel they want to stay at. So we're going to try that and see how it goes before we book any other conferences at convention centers. But I think people are really going to enjoy it. And we do get requests from members as well who just aren't big city people. I think that's worth considering, that not everyone wants to go to, a New York or a San Francisco and want to do something in a smaller city. And we are literally going to take over the town in Palm Springs. So I think it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, I do too. I'm looking forward to it. Now let's look ahead to 2018. Are there any new ATA initiatives coming up for the first half of the year?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned before, the website task force is hard at work coming up with what we want in a new website, which is the first step in the process. So they have done focus group interviews with a number of people inside ATA to get them to talk about the pluses and minuses of the current site and what we want out of a new site. And they will then sort of balance those competing demands and then pass it over to headquarters, who will do the logistics of actually contracting to have the new site developed and then ultimately deployed.
All right. Now, Corinne, this is your first podcast as ATA president. So perhaps you can give our listeners a glimpse of some of your priorities for the next, for your time in office for the next 2 years.
Sure. So I'm very much looking forward to working with the current board and our new slate of officers. So in addition to myself, we have Ted Wozniak, who was our outstanding treasurer for 4 years. Ted has now moved up to president-elect. Karen Kachik, previous board member, was elected to secretary, and John Milan, who's been on the Finance and Audit Committee for several years, was elected to treasurer. And I think that all 13 of us on the board make a really good team. I think we have a great diversity of viewpoints and specializations and geographic areas and languages. And for someone like myself, I think the tension during my term as president is always between the fact that I'm a doer. I have no shortage of big dreams and big ambitions. But the reality is that 2 years is not that long of a time when you think of how long it takes to really get a new program or new initiative up and running and done really well. So that being said, I'd like to see us add at least one new offering in terms of professional development, probably either in-person seminars, and we're sort of testing that idea out. January 20th, we're going to hold a certification exam prep session in Boston. The morning is going to be English into Spanish, and the afternoon is going to be all languages into English. And we haven't had those small in-person seminars for a while, but we're doing a test run of this one in January. So either continuing and expanding those, or offering online courses sort of similar to our webinar topics, but with more in-depth information and one-on-one feedback to the participants. I'd really like to see the new website up and running during my term, and I'd like to continue the efforts we've already started in terms of advocacy for the translation and interpreting professions, both to the U.S. government, local governments, private sector businesses, to better understand what we do and why our work is important. And I'd like to continue our efforts to bring interpreters into the ATA fold and have parity between what we offer for translators and interpreters. And then finally, I think I'd like to bring the next generation of translators and interpreters into the fold, whether that's people who now work in our profession, but they're part-time or hobbyists, or whether that's language students. People who might not even know what translation and interpreting are, but who wonder how they might, for example, make money with their degree in Slavic studies. So now that I look that over, that looks way too ambitious for 2 years. But as I said, I'm a doer. We're going to give it a try.
Well, I'm not so sure if that's too ambitious for you, Corinne, but it certainly sounds like you have your work cut out for you. But I wish you lots of luck in all of your endeavors for the next for your term, and I also look forward to watching how the next 2 years unfold.
Fantastic. Thank you.
But for now, thank you so much for joining us today, Corinne. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast again, your first time as president. I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you. And thanks so much for all of your time for the podcast, Matt, and also to all of our listeners. It's really gratifying to see the downloads for every episode going up and up, and to see how engaged our members are in ATA issues. So thanks to everyone.
That's it for our show today. Previous episodes of the ATA podcast can be found on ATA's website, atanet.org, under Resources. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, and other podcasting apps. If you have a moment, please leave a review today or spread the word on social. Speaking of social media, ATA has a Facebook, and yes, we're on Twitter and LinkedIn. So if you haven't already, be sure to connect with us on your favorite channel. Please also feel free to send me your comments and suggestions anytime. Write to podcast@atanet.org. Who knows? Your idea might just be the next ATA podcast. Episode 17 was produced by myself with support from Corinne and ATA Assistant Executive Director Mary David, as well as ATA's IT guru Rashawn Paccarel. The music you heard today was from bensound.com. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. Talk to you again in 2018.